Okay, hey everybody. I am coming to you live from my kitchen, and I promised you that if we had a snow day that I would read you a little bit from The Ugly Princess and the Wise Fool. So I am going to start where we left off, and we left off at this part. Jasper, said Rose in a severe voice. You know how to read, don't you? I must have picked it up somehow. Don't tell your dad. I'd lose my job. But Rose looked at him even more sternly. I think you've always known how to read, haven't you? Avoiding her eyes, Jasper kicked a little pebble. Yes, he admitted sulkily. I see. Why have you been pretending all these years that you couldn't? Jasper squirmed. Everybody knows that reading is a violation of the king's edict. But pretending to me? Rose asked more softly and ominously. Jasper hung his head, feeling terrible. He wanted to tell Rose everything, but he'd kept quiet about it for so long that he didn't know how to start. You're the king's daughter, he mumbled. If you knew I was breaking the law and didn't tell, you could have been charged with high treason. It was for your protection. Treason is a crime against the country, just so you know that part. This wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth. Rose studied Jasper's face closely. There's something you're not telling me. Sure, Jasper said in a snappish voice because he felt so bad about himself. There are lots of things I'm not telling you. I'm not telling you what time it is, or what I'd like for supper yesterday, or why worms don't talk. I can't tell you everything all at once. Rose lost her temper. Fine, she said, standing up. If you're going to keep secrets from me, I'm not going to go on this silly quest at all. I'm just going to go back to the palace and put on a wedding dress and wait for Prince Parsley to gallop over the northern hills and take me to the kingdom of Herb, where I will live happily ever after. Because for all his faults, Prince Parsley at least does not keep secrets. She heaved up her silken train and stomped angrily down the path in the direction of the palace. I wouldn't be too sure about that, Jasper called after her. And if he doesn't keep secrets, it's because he's too boring and square-jawed to have any. He stood up, turned on his heel, and marched in the other direction. Chapter 25. Jasper had been marching for only a few steps when he stopped short and peered ahead into the deep, dark woods. He could make out a figure coming toward him down the path. Terrific, he thought. Now you show up. Jasper turned, searching the palace path for Rose, but she'd already disappeared around a curve. He called her name a few times. She didn't answer. She's probably still mad. Remorse filled his heart. Remorse is a sadness for something that you've done. What if Rose lost the opportunity to complete her quest because of his lies and stubbornness? If he'd only told her the whole truth, they would still be sitting on the big rock together when the sorcerer or witch person passed by. He could at least try to persuade the sorcerer or witch to follow him back to the palace and find Rose and do the quest there. It wasn't something they traditionally agreed to, but as that wacky Eleanor had remarked, in the real world, you could sometimes bend the rules you'd memorized so carefully in school. It was worth a try. So he waited by the rock. The figure approached very slowly. As it got nearer, Jasper could see that it was an old man, dressed in rags and carrying a sack and gathering wild berries. Just the sort of person his quest book had led him to expect. When the old man got even nearer, Jasper noticed that he was covered from head to foot in berry juice, a patchwork of purple, blue, red, yellow, orange, and even emerald green stains. Excuse me, sir, he said politely, stepping forward and addressing the old man. This is a picture of the old man. Excuse me, sir, he said politely, stepping forward and addressing the old man. The book had warned him that sorcerers and witches must be spoken to very politely indeed, lest they take offense and put spells on you. I know this is a bit irregular, and I'm very sorry to interrupt you so unceremoniously, but you see, my friend and I, we're on a quest. Friend? Asked the old man, looking around with a puzzled expression. I see only you. Chapter 26. Rose huffed along down the path toward the palace as fast as her legs could take her in the heavy ball gown. Every hair on her head was singing in triumph and suggesting ever more complicated styles suitable for the wedding. Muffin tin, inverted doorknob, wilted plum blossom, duck on a nest with 4 eggs, cherry picked on Tuesday, baked in a pie on Wednesday, they babbled. Her arms were also talking to each other, debating the merits of cloth of gold versus cloth of silver. Her shoulders were insisting on epaulets, to the consternation of her ears. Those would be fancy things on your shoulders. Please be quiet, Rose shouted. Her heart, unlike all the other parts of her, was sore and unhappy. She was beginning to think she'd done the wrong thing by storming away. Jasper had been her best friend since she was 13, and he'd stayed up all night with her, helping her through an entire test and the beginning part of a quest. He'd even managed to keep most of his temper, despite Eleanor. She should be able to overlook his secret-keeping at least long enough to finish her quest, which was, of course, the most important thing. It didn't seem likely at this point that she'd succeed, but she really wouldn't feel good about herself if she just gave up out of ill humor and being stubborn. She slowed, turned around, and started back toward the big rock. Then again, she thought, feeling a wave of sleepiness, maybe it would be best just not to rock the boat with all this quest stuff. It was quite possible that Prince Parsley was her destiny. She was a 3rd princess after all. Her marriage would reconcile her parents to all the trouble she'd brought them and warm their aged hearts. She'd eventually get used to being the most beautiful woman on the earth, lit up by spotlights wherever she went. She'd probably come to believe that the enchantment was real and that she had never been ugly. If she hurried, she might even have time for a few hours' nap before the wedding and related festivities. Rose turned toward the palace again, but this time she got only a couple steps down the path before she came to a solid halt. Destiny or not, she didn't want to marry the terrible Prince Parsley. She had to finish her quest. Jasper was the only one who seemed willing to help her, even if he did have that peculiar compulsion to keep secrets from her. And even if he didn't seem to be coming after her, trying to apologize. And even if it would serve him right if she got married and left him alone in couscous. Wait, why did she need him anyway? What if she finished her quest without his help? Rose imagined his surprise and amazement when he trudged sadly back to the palace, expecting wedding festivities, only to find that Prince Parsley was gone, and there was no further question of marriage. He'd probably race over full of happy questions and try to cozy up to her as though nothing had gone wrong, but she'd just nod at him, coolly, and then never speak to him again, unless he was very nice. She was entitled to a few secrets of her own. She stepped off the path and began to slog through the dead leaves and underbrush with determination, even though, as her feet kept angrily reminding her, she had no idea where she was going. Surely sooner or later she'd run into the necessary sorcerer or witch. She didn't have any books, but many princesses before her had successfully accomplished quests without dragging books along. If she remained good-hearted and well-bred and pure of purpose, she reasoned, she'd get things right instinctively. All she could do was keep moving and hope she ended up where she was meant to go. Do you think she's going to end up where she's meant to go? Do you think she needs Jasper? Do you think she's going to get lost? Those are all questions going through my head. Okay, I'm going to keep reading. Rose walked for what felt like hours, but was probably only about 30 minutes. The woods looked remarkably the same in all directions. Maybe they were enchanted, she began to think, a little nervously. She remembered noticing something in one of those quest books about magic paths that took questers in all sorts of wrong directions and threw them into the jaws of terrible things. Also, her left glass slipper was biting into her foot, causing her to limp, and the foot itself began to scream at her in the lowest and most vicious language she'd ever heard. Suddenly, over the sound of crunching leaves and the other complaints of the foot, she heard the murmur of other voices. Was it a sorcerer or a witch at last? She darted behind a tree and peered cautiously around the trunk. All right, in class we would say, dun, 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 dun. And that's where we're going to stop for today. Do you think it's a friend or a foe that she's hearing murmuring nearby? All right.